Hey everyone, today we see some warnings about worship. On the first day of the week, we gathered together to break bread. Paul was holding a discussion with them. Since he was leaving the next day, he continued talking until midnight. There were many lamps in the upstairs room where we had gathered. A young man named Eutychus was sitting on the window. He was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on, and when he was sound asleep, he fell from the third floor and died. Paul went down, fell on him, and embraced him and said, "Don't be alarmed, he's alive." Then Paul went back upstairs and ate. He talked for a long time, right up until daybreak, and then he left. They took the young man away alive, and they were greatly comforted. So one thing, there's a warning here for preachers: don't literally bore your audience to death with a long sermon. And also a warning for members, I guess, don't sit in a windowsill during a late night sermon. Now, this is actually meant to kind of be a bit of a funny story. Eutychus, the guy who falls out the window, his name literally means lucky. But also, we do get some interesting insight to early Christian worship. We see they're meeting on the first day of the week on a Sunday, right? The day of Jesus' resurrection becomes the Christian day of worship, which again, we take for granted, but the fact that Jewish people started meeting on this day instead of on the Jewish Sabbath, that's a big deal, right? Anytime we just change church services by an hour is a big deal, and they're moving the day. And we also actually see here that they're meeting in the evenings, because in the ancient world, Sunday was not a day off. And so they had to wait until people were done working to get together. And we also see that they meet in homes. We take for granted church buildings, but early church didn't have those yet. And so sometimes they were in a nicer home that had room for everybody. It seems like here they're in a smaller apartment, which is why people are crowded to the windows. And they also meet to break bread. Now, that phrase can either refer to a meal or to the Lord's Supper, or it can be both, which is actually probably the case. We know from other early Christian literature that the Lord's Supper was an actual meal in the beginning. And so that's what they're doing here. Now, I've seen this passage used as an argument to support weekly communion, which I fully support. I think that is why we come together, to meet around the table. But if you're focusing a lot on that aspect of it, you also need to notice kind of the funny aspect that they don't actually meet and to eat until after midnight, which would mean it's technically Monday. It's not the first day of the week anymore, because Paul just couldn't stop preaching. So I don't know, maybe the takeaway from the story of Lucky falling out the window is to not be overly serious about some of these things when it comes to worship. But at the same time, it is important for us to think about why we meet together. It's about sharing life. Sometimes a sermon or a class can be life-giving, but sometimes it's other aspects of meeting together that does that. And so maybe we can focus less on what we need to do and more on what's going to give people life.